All right, folks. Recently, group audits, or you can say the audits of group financial statements, is an area frequently examined in the advanced audit and assurance examination, and it can be tested at any stage, like any stage of the audit cycle. Therefore, in any section of the examination. It can be tested in planning stage. It can to identify risk arising from the aspects of the growth of audits and the responsibility of auditors in this regard. And it can be tested at the middle stage while collecting the evidences of the with the quality control aspect. So in this video, right, we will discuss all of the aspects, and this video is particularly based on the examiner's recent articles on group audits. So, firstly, what we will do, we will look at the basic thing about the group audits. Group auditor, you know, group auditor is responsible for providing the audit opinion on the group financial statements. So, components of group financial statements can include components of group financial statements can include what? Number one, it can include subsidiaries. It can include associates. It can include joint ventures and branches. And the components of the maybe can be audited by can be audited by group auditor or by different firm of auditors, which is known as component auditors. So far, so good. In addition, the group auditor will form an opinion on the parent company's individual financial statements as well as on the group consolidated financial statements, right? So so far so good. Now we will look at the objectives of the group audits. So ISA 600 states that the objectives of the auditors are: number one, to determine to act as the auditor of the group, as the auditor of the group financial statements, and if acting as the auditor as of the group financial statements, to communicate clearly with component auditors about the scope of the audit, timing of their work on the financial statement, uh, and communication related to components, communication related to components and their findings, to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence regarding the financial statement, or I'll say regarding the financial information of the components and the consolidation process to express an opinion, whether the group financial statements are prepared in all material respects in accordance with the applicable financial reporting framework, right? On whether the group financial statement are prepared in all material respects in accordance with the applicable financial reporting state framework. Right, so the group auditor cannot simply rely on another's auditor, or you can say component auditor's opinion on the financial statements of the company, and assume that the figures taken from the company's financial statements into the consolidated financial statements are appropriate. A material misstatement in the financial statements of the company could become a material misstatement in the financial statements of the group, right? So that's the matter. Then we have to discuss on another matter, which is determine whether to act as the auditor of the group financial statements or not, right? So determine whether to act as the auditor of the group financial statement. So prior to the acceptance of a new engagement as auditor, the group engagement partner must determine that they can reasonably expect to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence in relation to the consolidation process and the financial statements of the component of the group in order to form their audit opinion. So number one point, number one point, whether they can reasonably rely on rely on company, so reasonably expect to obtain obtain sufficient appropriate evidence, right? And so as part of this process, it is necessary to obtain an understanding of uh, the group, its components and environment of the components in order to identify significant components of the group, right? So number 2 point which we will have to look at is that they has to consolidate process the financial information and of components components of group in order to form an opinion, right? Then so as part of this process, it is necessary to obtain understanding of the group, its components, and the environment of the components in order to identify sufficient significant components of the group, right? A significant component is one which is of individual financial significance to the group or to due to specific nature of circumstances. It is likely to include significant risk of material misstatements of the group financial statements, right? Where a significant component is audited by another party, or you can say component auditors, it must be evaluated whether the group audit team be able to be involved in the work of the component auditors to extent necessary to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence, right? So then what you have to do, obtain an understanding of the group, its components and environment of components in order to identify significant component of group. Now, the significant a significant component is one is one which is which is now look at it very carefully. Do not usually you guys make a blunder, the students make a blunder in the to identify the significant components of the group. So significant component is one which is a significant, which has a, I'll say significant risk, significant risk of material misstatement of group financial statement, where significant component is audited by another audit firm, or you can say by component auditors, right? Then it is necessary to evaluate whether group auditor will be will able to will able to include in the work of component auditor to extent to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. So far, so good. I hope you understand till here. Okay. Now, the acceptance and the communicate the acceptance and continuations of the group auditing could be examined in several ways, right? Examples could include, now what are the examples which can be tested in your examinations? Well, include it may require candidates to analyze whether to accept a new group audit client, a new group audit line, or it can be like to issues, identify issues which may require auditor to resign from an existing client. Also, uh, it could be examined um, in the context of quality control and professional issues, right? Uh, for example, a group audit had been performed and there had been an indication that the firm might reasonably have expected a difficulty obtaining evidences with respect to component auditors. Such kind of scenario had been examined by examiner in past many times. We got that similar type of question in 2017, in 2018 sittings as well, in 19 sittings as well, right? So here, ISA 600, ISA 600 give us the guidance, right? That how to determine the significance of the components, right? Although it is a matter of a professional judgment, right? So rather than a set of definitive rules, a standard state that depending on the nature and circumstances, right, of the group, a group engagement team may decide to apply a percentage, right, such as 15% to an appropriate benchmark, right? So benchmark to identify uh, components components which are financially significant. And for examples, it can include group assets, 15% of group assets, um, group assets, cash flows, profits, or turnover, right? So, in AAA, Advanced Audit Assurance Examination, candidates are expected to apply judgment to the scenario given in a question rather than simply assume that 15% of a given benchmark is appropriate in all circumstances. So you are acting as a audit manager in your exams. So rather than just applying 15% and assuming that it is the significant component of the group, do not do that. You have to use your professional judgment. Mind it, right? So far, so good. Now, then we will look at communication. Uh, Communication with component auditors, right? So, again, here, ISA 600 requires group audit team. So, who requires ISA 600? Requires group audit team to communicate, to communicate what? To communicate uh, its required its requirements to whom? To component auditors on timely basis. And this will include the work to be performed by the component auditor and the use to be made of it. It will set out the form and content of the information to be provided by the component auditor, right? Well, such communication required to set out what? Number one, um, ethical requirements relevant to the group audit, in particular the independence requirements. Okay. Number two, component materiality level, the materiality for a component determined by the group, and the threshold above which misstatement cannot be determined to be clearly trivial to the group. Make sure that it is clearly trivial to the group, right? And then significant risks of material misstatement identified for the group financial statement which are relevant for the component auditor, and a request that the component auditors will notify the group auditor on a timely basis of other identified risks along with their response to those risks, right? So what is that? Number 3 is significant risk of material misstatement of material misstatement identified for the group financial statement which are relevant for the component auditor Component auditor will notify the group. Group auditor on a timely basis of other identified risks along with their response to those risks. Okay. And then number four, what's that? A list of related parties identified the group material management and any other related parties the group is aware of, along with the request that a component auditor communicates any further related parties not identified the group management or the group engagement team. Okay, so a list of related parties identified by group management and any other related parties the group auditor is aware of. Group auditor is aware of yum 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 along with the request that the component auditor communicate any further related parties not identified not identified by the group management or the group engagement team. So far so good. Right. So the component auditor is required to confirm that they will cooperate with the component timely basis. The information expected to be provided to the group engagement team by the component auditors, and it will includes. So what it will includes, let's say, see, well, just a second, just a second, yeah. Uh, okay, now the information expected to be provided by the group engagement team. Engagement team. by component auditors includes, well, it includes what? It includes number one, confirmation of their compliance with the group auditor requirements and ethical standards. Number two, any non-compliance with laws and regulations by the component, uncorrected misstatements of the financial statement of components, indicators of possible management bias, right? Uh, Description of any significant deficiencies identified in internal controls. Number six, other significant matters such as those they expect to communicate to those charged with governance, written representations, requested of component management, and lastly but not least, their overall findings. And audit opinion or conclusions. Right now, next thing which we have to look at is obtain sufficient, appropriate audit evidence regarding the components and the consolidation process. Here we have stage one, which is gathering evidence on the components. So, what evidence can be? Firstly, we will have over here our planning and risk assessment, right? So, usually when when formulating the audit strategy and plan, the group auditor has a good understanding of the structure of the group, the significance of each component of the group, the mechanics of the consolidation process, and the risk of material misstatement presented by each of the company's financial statements. Materiality levels should be established or for the groups in aggregate and for the individually significant components, right? So the group has to make sure that the auditor, the group auditor, has good understanding of the group, significance of each component of group, the mechanics of the consolidation process, the risk of material misstatement, ROMM presented by each of company financial statements. Materiality levels should be established, should be established for the group in aggregate, and for individually significant components. Right. The group auditor is required to be involved in the component auditor's risk assessment and the determining of the nature, extent, and timing of procedures to address the identified risk of material misstatements for all significant components, regardless of whether the company is exempt from the or audit due to its size. Its component has been determined to be significant due to its specific nature or circumstances rather than its size. Then either the group audit team or a competent auditor on its behalf must perform one or more of the procedures. uh, okay, so the The group audit team or a significant component or a component auditor on its behalf must perform one or more of one or more of what one or more of procedures, and it includes number one, an audit of the financial information of the financial information of the component using component materiality. Number two, an audit of one or more specific account balances, transactions, or disclosures relating to the significant risk of material misstatement. Number three, specific audit procedures relating to the likely significant risk of material misstatement. So for components not significant at the group engagement team must carry out analytical procedures at the group level, right? So far, so good. Now we have to look at another matter, that is involvement in the work of component auditors. So for all companies within the group, regardless of materiality, um, the group auditor should review a report of work done by the component auditors and evaluate significant matters arising. Right, such matter will be discussed with the component auditor, the component management, or the group management as appropriate. Right. So it may be possible, or it may be the case that having perform actions, which I discussed just uh, a few minutes back, the group auditor concludes that further audit work is required on the financial statement of the component. For example, the group auditor may consider that element of the financial statements of the component could be materially misstated, and further audit evidence is necessary, right? So it is possible that group auditor conclude further audit work is required uh, on the financial statement of components. Okay, then group auditor should determine the group auditor should determine the nature of the work performed and work necessary, and whether the work should be performed um, by the group auditor or the component auditor. The group auditor should determine the nature of the work necessary, and whether the work should be carried out by group auditor or component auditor, right? And the group auditor should now have obtained sufficient evidence to show that the component financial statement is free from material misstatement, and there are sound basis for present preparation of the consolidation financial statements. And here comes our stage two, that is auditing the consolidation, right? That is our consolidation process. The group auditor must plan the audit procedures to be performed on consolidation process. And for some groups, the consolidation process is complex and it is likely to involve some of judgment, and so there is high degree of audit risk. So, through planning will be essential to ensure that risk is minimized, right? So here, auditor will need to understand need to understand what number one, group wide controls. Number two, right, group wide controls obviously relevant to the consolidation process. For example, instructions issued to components by the management. Group auditor will need to group auditor will need to assess the adequacy of such controls and their operating effectiveness and determine whether reliance can be placed upon those controls in determining the nature, extent, and timing of procedures on the consolidation. Right? So we determine whether reliance can be placed on the nature, timing, and extent of procedures on the consolidation. Now, lastly, what we'll have the types of procedures which could be performed include so procedures now which could be performed on the consolidation. Number one, confirming that figures taken into the consolidation process have been accurately extracted from the financial statements of the components and that all components are included, that the figures taken into the consolidation have been accurately extracted from the financial statement of the components and that all components are included. Number two, evaluating the classification of the components of the group. For example, whether the components have been correctly identified and treated as subsidiaries, associates, or joint ventures. All right. Number three, review The disclosures necessary in group financial statements, such as related party disclosures or related party transactions and minority interests, etc. Number four, investigating the treatment of any components which have a different financial year or accounting policies from those of rest of the group. So then gather evidence, obviously gather evidence appropriate to specific consolidation process uh, or consolidation and adjustments, right? Adjustments necessary necessary by reporting standards, right? Accounting standards, right? And what those can be, what those can be. Any guesses, folks? Well, let me tell you, if you don't remember, those are: number one, calculation of goodwill; number two, cancellation of intra-group balances; provision for unrealized profits as a result of intra-group transactions; number four, fair value adjustments; needed for assets and liabilities held by the component, right? Number five, retranslation of financial statements of components, right? Of components denominated in foreign currency, right? So some of the evidence required to meet the above objectives will gathered by the component auditors, and it is the group's auditors' responsibility to communicate to the component auditors the evidence which they are expected to gather. This communication ideally occurs at the audit planning stage, right? So finally, the thing which you should know, that um, the group auditor should have a sound knowledge of IS, IFRS, including IFRS 3, that is business combination, IS 28, investment in associates. IS 31, interest in joint ventures. Number IS 32, financial instruments, that is presentation. IS 39, financial instruments, recognition and measurement, or I will I will say the combo or the recent one, IFRS 9, financial instruments, right? So as far as the exam question is question set at the planning stage, which asks for the consideration of risk of material misstatements, audit risk arising from a scenario are often set in the context of the group. As such, candidates would be expected to identify specific risks arising as a result, right? That could be your question number one, right? So, what can be exam focus points now? Number one, specific risk at planning stage, right? So, where you would be expected to recognize and justify whether uh, component is significant. Number one. Number two, consider the classification risks from a component or other unusual significant arising in relation to the component. You also might be expected to identify specific weakness or risks arising in consolidation process. Right. For example, let me give you example for this. Example can include uh, number one, difference in reporting dates, right, which could cause a risk of inappropriate figures being included in the consolidation for a component. Number two, client producing group accounts. Group accounts for the first time have increased inherent and control risk for first time, right? Uh, Trading difficulties in subsidiary, which may which may indicate impairment adjustment, which is required for goodwill held in the consolidated financial statements. So, candidates or students may also be expected to describe the procedures to be performed on evidence which should be obtained in relation to risk arising in the group, which could be examined at any point in the audit cycle. Now, candidates could also be required to evaluate whether sufficient appropriate audited evidence has been obtained regarding to the financial statement of the group of companies in order to determine appropriate audit opinion. Candidates may also be asked to identify matters to communicate to management or those charged with governance or to assess ethical and professional issues in group context. So it can be at planning stage, at the stage of during the audit to design the procedures, etc. It can be to look at the quality control of the audit evidences obtained. It can be stage of the reporting stage, right? So get ready, folks, and I hope you find it. Now, this video will help you to better understand this topic and perform well if you get the question at any stage of the group audits in your exams. See you in the next session, next video. Bye bye.